1915, the longest year of the Ottoman Empire. The year 1915 is considered the longest year for the Ottoman Empire due to several pivotal and devastating events during World War I, particularly the military, political, and social crises it faced. The Ottoman Empire officially entered World War I on October 29, 1914, by joining the Central Powers, Germany and Austria-Hungary. This decision was heavily influenced by the Ottoman-German alliance. By 1915, the empire was engaged in multi-front warfare, with the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, and the Gallipoli fronts demanding significant resources and manpower. This involvement stretched Ottoman military capacity, setting the stage for prolonged conflicts that would last until 1918. The Gallipoli Campaign was one of the major military events of 1915. Allied forces, primarily from Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, attempted to capture the Dardanelles and secure a sea route to Russia. Beginning in April 1915, the campaign resulted in a brutal stalemate. Despite the heavy loss of life on both sides, Ottoman forces, under the command of Mustafa Kemal, successfully defended the peninsula. The campaign dragged on until early 1916, but 1915 saw the most intense fighting. In January 1915, the Ottoman army faced a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Sarıkamış. This battle, fought against Russian forces in the harsh winter conditions of the Caucasus Mountains, resulted in the deaths of nearly 90,000 Ottoman soldiers, mostly due to freezing temperatures and poor logistical planning by Enver Pasha. This failure was a significant blow to the empire's military strength and morale. One of the most controversial and significant events of 1915 was the mass deportation and killing of Armenians in what is now recognized by many historians as the Armenian Genocide. Fearing that Armenians would ally with the Russians, the Ottoman government initiated the forced deportation of Armenians from eastern Anatolia. Hundreds of thousands were killed or died from starvation and disease during forced marches. This event left a deep scar on Ottoman society and remains a subject of international dispute. Another front that drained Ottoman resources was in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. British forces, advancing from the south, sought to control oil-rich regions and waterways. Initially, the Ottomans were able to stall the British advance, culminating in the Siege of Kut, 1915 to 1916, but the campaign placed a severe burden on Ottoman logistics and manpower. By 1915, the impact of the war on Ottoman society was severe. Widespread food shortages, inflation, and a breakdown of traditional social structures put immense pressure on the civilian population. Rural areas were particularly hard hit, as able-bodied men were conscripted into the military, leaving agricultural production to decline. Diseases, malnutrition, and displacement became rampant, adding to the population's suffering. The military defeats, especially in Sarıkamış and Mesopotamia, led to internal political strife within the ruling Committee of Union and Progress, CUP. Leaders like Enver Pasha, who were initially seen as capable military strategists, faced growing criticism for their role in the empire's wartime failures. This political crisis reflected the broader instability within the Ottoman leadership. The Ottoman Empire's alliance with Germany alienated it from the Western powers, especially Britain, France, and Russia. This diplomatic isolation meant that the empire had to rely almost entirely on German military and financial support, a relationship that was increasingly unequal as the war dragged on and Germany became embroiled in its own battles on the Western Front. The Ottoman Empire controlled vast territories across the Middle East, including modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Palestine. 1915 saw increasing unrest among these colonial subjects, particularly Arabs and Kurds, who began to seek greater autonomy or independence from Ottoman rule. This year marked a turning point in the disintegration of the empire's control over its non-Turkish territories. The financial strain of the war became critical in 1915. Inflation soared, basic goods became scarce, and the empire's agricultural and industrial production fell sharply. With much of the Ottoman economy dependent on agriculture, the conscription of rural laborers further undermined economic stability. The government resorted to borrowing from Germany, deepening its dependency. As First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill had championed the Gallipoli Campaign as a means to open a new front and break the stalemate on the Western Front. The failure of the campaign in 1915 was a personal and political disaster for Churchill. The success of Ottoman forces in defending Gallipoli cemented their status as a formidable fighting force despite overall strategic weaknesses. The Gallipoli Campaign also marked the emergence of Mustafa Kemal, later Atatürk, as a national hero. His leadership during the campaign, especially his role in defending the critical high ground at Çanak Bayır, earned him wide acclaim and positioned him as a future leader of Turkey. His rise to prominence in 1915 laid the groundwork for the Turkish nationalist movement. The Ottoman decision to side with the Central Powers was seen as a diplomatic failure by European powers, particularly Britain and France, who had hoped to keep the Ottoman Empire neutral. By 1915, it became clear that the empire's participation in the war would have long-term consequences, particularly in the reshaping of the Middle East after the war. The defeats in Sarikamish, Mesopotamia, and the prolonged stalemate in Gallipoli took a heavy toll on the morale of both the military and the civilian population. Public confidence in the government eroded as the war dragged on with no clear victories in sight. This widespread disillusionment sowed the seeds for future political upheaval. The war also triggered changes in the cultural and intellectual landscape of the Ottoman Empire. Intellectuals began to question the empire's future, with some embracing nationalist ideologies that would later form the foundation of the Turkish Republic. Others became disillusioned with the empire's attempts to modernize and integrate with the West. In addition to external threats, the Ottoman Empire faced internal challenges in 1915. The Arab Revolt, although it would fully materialize in 1916, began to simmer, as did uprisings among Armenians and other minorities. These internal rebellions further strained the Ottoman military, which was already stretched thin. The Allied naval blockade of Ottoman ports significantly hampered the empire's ability to import essential goods, including food and military supplies. This contributed to the worsening economic conditions and exacerbated the famine and suffering within the empire. The Ottoman government enacted stricter conscription laws in 1915, pulling more men into the military. As the war dragged on, even teenagers and older men were conscripted. This militarization of society deepened the divide between the ruling elite and the struggling civilian population. The Dardanelles, a narrow strait that connects the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara, was of immense strategic importance to both the Ottoman Empire and the Allies. Control of this waterway was critical for maintaining supply lines to Russia. The Gallipoli Campaign underscored the strategic importance of the Dardanelles, as the Ottomans' ability to hold this crucial point delayed Allied efforts to relieve pressure on the Eastern Front. By the end of 1915, the Ottoman Empire's regional dominance was in serious decline. The strains of war, combined with internal dissent and external military pressure, marked the beginning of the end for an empire that had once spanned 3 continents. The events of 1915 initiated a series of losses that the empire would not recover from.